Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be doing a bit of a cleanup and assessment of our recently purchased Cadet Original, which has been sitting in storage for many years, so it's got a thick layer of dirt on it, so it's going to need a good clean today as the first thing we're going to do. Now there are some bits of this tractor that we've already started cleaning up to look at the serial numbers and stuff like that, but in general it is still covered in the same muck as when we had it delivered to us. So we think the best way to get this off will initially be putting a pressure washer on it, and then we can hit it with degreaser and stuff afterwards if it needs, but we'll have to see how much it needs. However, here in the UK currently, it is a bit of a heat wave, so in some areas there are water shortages and therefore hosepipe bans. However, our region, we haven't got water shortages, so there aren't any hosepipe bans. So we can still use the pressure washer, but we're going to be as sparing as possible with the water, just to be responsible. And then after that, we can pull it back in here and work from one end to the other, just look at what parts we need to get for this tractor, what jobs it needs doing to it, and we can try to gauge how quick of a project this would be to get it back in action. However, we'll now head outside with this and meet you out there. Now finished pressure washing as much of the muck off of the tractor as possible, and then we just blew it all over with an airline to get rid of the moisture, and then we've also run a rag covered in WD-40 over it as well, just to give it a bit more of a clean, which it was hard work to get some of the muck off of the paint, and it's still not perfect, but it'll do for now. And it seems that quite a lot of the tractor, the paint's kind of bubbled, like on the bonnet here. That is what it is. Now, we've put the tractor on the workbench here, which was quite challenging. Firstly, because of the length of it, with this over-engineered rear hitch on the back, and then also balancing it, which is why we've taken the rear wheel weights off for now, and also trying to actually find lift points on this is much more difficult than a Bones or a wheel horse. But we'll now start going through stuff. We'll probably start at the front, just because it's easier. And something we've noticed already with the steering, if I go to one lock, left hand side here, you can see this steering rod is solid up against the chassis there. And if I go to the other steering lock, then you can see those two steering rods hit each other. Now, I'm not fully sure why that is, however there is a bit of wear in some of the steering components, it feels like. So we're going to try to jack up the front end on the chassis rather than the front axle, and then we can have a bit of a look to see where the play is. So we've lifted the front end up a bit now, and we found some major wear here inside the wheels. And we've actually jumped ahead a bit on the other side and taken the wheel off to try to find the cause of this, and we found this thing inside the wheel, which appears to be a bit of bronze or copper, something like that, folded around. Well, I've lost it now. Folded around to try to bridge this wear. Now, there should be two wheel bushings or bearings per wheel, one on each side. So we need to have a clean up of this to see if they're still in there and they're just badly worn, or if they've come out or something like that. So we need to have a clean up here to tell what's going on, and then we can better explain. So we've had a clean up of this area, and we can feel a bit of a lip on the underside of the spindles. It's not too bad, but you can tell there's some wear there. And having cleaned up the wheel, it appears to be the same system used on our Boland's Ride-a-matic, our 1960 Boland's Ride-a-matic, with these steel bushings, which we've never been a fan of because that's steel on steel and there's no wear surface really. So when it comes to sorting out the wear in those wheels, we have two options. Either we try to find a supplier for these steel bushings, which we don't have any Cub Cadet parts suppliers at the moment, so we'll have to do some investigation there and some more research. Or we do what we did on our 1960 Boland's Ride-a-matic, which is to drill these out and fit them with oilite bronze bushings in there. Then we have an actual wear surface that you can replace and hope that that sorts the issue. So that's kind of that part of that done. Other notes on the front axle, there's a little bit of movement in here in the front axle. It's not too bad. The grease noises are making it sound like it's more than it is, but there's no bronze bushings in here. So like we did on our 1960 Boland's Ride-a-matic, we'd have to take the front axle off, put it in the mill, drill through there, which the setting up for that would take hours, and then press some bronze bushings in there to get rid of all of that movement. I'm not sure it's at that stage yet, so we'll probably leave that for now, just pack it with grease, maybe take the spindles off, clean it, pack it with new grease, and then leave that portion for now. Maybe when they get a bit more worn, we'd consider doing the mill work and the machining. The other thing is the center pivot, which has quite a bit of backwards and forwards play on it, as you can see there, which we need to kind of understand how the pivot system works. I can see there's a bolt through there, but we need to see whether there's any sort of sleeve or anything like a Ride-a-matic. And then if there is, make up a new one or replace it or something like that. But again, that involves a bit more investigation. So that's pretty much all of the front axle work described for you there and noted. So we need to spend some time on the front axle, and while we're at it, we might as well do some steering work as well, because as you can see, there's quite a bit of wear in these rod ends. They pivot most of the way around and up and down movement, and that's the same on both rods, which is probably the cause of these hitting both the chassis and each other when we're doing the steering, going to each lock. So those rod ends need replacing at the least. And then the Ross steering box, we can't really tell too much about the condition from here, but we'll probably rebuild this at some point, which Dad has some experience with these Ross steering boxes, so hopefully that should come in handy for rebuilding that. And then at the top of the steering column here, in the dash panel, there's this kind of rubber grommet piece which should keep the steering column central and still. However, if I give this a shove, you can see there's loads of movement in that, so that needs a new one of those being made up and putting in there. And we've got to make sure that this movement hasn't damaged the dash panel too badly and made that hole ovaled, because that would not be helpful. And also inside the steering column, this top bushing, if I give us a gentle nudge, it's got a little bit of wear in it. You can see the steering wheel moves backwards and forwards inside there, so that may need replacing soon as well. And that's pretty much all of the bits that we've noticed for the steering and front axle. While it was up on the stands, we had a quick look at the clutch, which is an automotive type clutch on these Cub Cadets, the same as a Boland's tube frame, or very similar. And when we pushed the clutch pedal down, nothing was disengaged, so it was a bit stuck, but it took us maybe a minute to free that off, so that's not a problem. And the clutch now works as it should do, and the tractor is back on all fours now, so the front end is back down. And while we're just going over a couple of odd things, we also don't have an IH badge for the front of the grille, which would be up here somewhere. which we don't actually have one of those on any of our 3 Cub originals. So we're going to try to find a supplier that isn't too expensive for those. And then we can have those IH badges for all of our tractors, because I do think they complete the look of these Cub originals. Now, if we go around to the other side, we can talk engine. Actually, never mind, I was too hasty going around. There is one thing on the engine I want to mention while we're over here, which is this. You can see the backing plate's actually cracked and there's a piece missing, which is where one of the cowling bolts would mount on there. And you can see someone's drilled a couple of smaller holes, one down there, 2 up here, probably for some smaller fixings, but I doubt they've worked because it's quite a small shoulder on the backing plate. So when you pull a recoil pull start, that does move a bit, which is unfortunate. It's really not what you want on a recoil pull start, because there's quite a bit of strain going through there when you pull it over. So we'll have to see what we're going to do about that, or if it's usable as it is. Now, if we come around to the other side, obviously this is going to need all the fuel system cleaning out, the fuel tank and the sediment bowl, which is nice to see, same as our Boland's Ride-a-matic. Something else that's nice to see is this solid fuel line that goes around there, so that's not perished or needing replacing. Another thing we've spotted is this carburetor looks too shiny to be the original, and as you can see there, it actually says Walbro on there, which was the original company that made the carburetors for these engines. So this must be a new old stock carburetor that was put on here at some point. Now, obviously it's been run since that was put on there, but that's nice to see. And if we give this throttle spindle a bit of a wiggle, there doesn't seem to be any movement in there, but it's quite stiff, and the choke is the same. So there's definitely no wear in that carburetor. That will need a rebuild, probably wants some of those bits freeing off just a little bit. And I think the throttle cable is all fine. That's just that throttle spindle being a bit stiff to move, but it looks like there's a good control over the throttle on this, unlike some of our Ride-a-matics that we've been using recently, or other Kohler engines where you move the throttle a little bit and the engine revs through the roof. But those are some of the things that we've spotted on here, so this will obviously need a carburetor rebuild as one of the jobs now on our list. We won't check for a spark now, because before trying to start this engine, we'll be putting new points on there and a new spark plug anyway, so there's no point trying to see if it's got a spark as it is. So when it comes to engine investigation, that's all we're going to do until we start this project. We'll start moving a bit further back now. On the dash tower, when it comes to the controls and instruments on here, the only thing we've actually got is a throttle lever. Now, the decal here tells you what everything should be on here. So on this side should be a push-pull choke cable, which the choke control on the carburetor you can just do by hand, seeing as you've got to be off the tractor to start it anyway on this side, so that's easy enough. We need to find out whether that was just an optional extra to have that on there, or whether someone's taken the choke cable off this one and therefore we need to buy one for this. That all comes with research. Now we've got these 2 holes here, which, as the decal suggests, this is for your ignition key, so there should be one in there. And this is for a starter button if you got the optional extra of electric start rather than pull start. Now we need to find out if it should have a key being magneto ignition. You'd expect it to, I would say, because then the only other ways of turning this off would be pushing the button on the points cover or turning the fuel off, which neither of which are very nice ways to turn off your engine. So it'd be quite nice to put a magneto switch on this. Just need to make sure that that's what happened originally, and then probably get a blank for this hole at some point, seeing as this isn't electric start and we're probably not going to convert it. So that's everything for that kind of dash area. Now we'll probably put this up on axle stands on the back end, and we can try to see whether we can see where that oil leak is coming from down here. Now we have the back end up in the air here, so hopefully we'll actually get to see what the oil leak is coming from the gearbox. But a common problem on these that we've heard about is oil leaks from the axle carriers on the sides of the gearbox and everything here. However, we know this won't be a problem for us because we knew the previous owner, and we know the previous owner actually knew what he was doing with these, which is always handy. So he did all the oil seals in those about 10 years ago, I think. And I think he might have also done the bushings or bearings or whatever it is in those axle carriers, because there isn't any side-to-side movement in these at all. The only movement is end float, which I'm not fully sure how you reduce end float or what the end float should be on one of these cubs. So that's something we need to refer to the manual for, and then maybe sort out in due course at a later date. Now, if we look under the tractor here, the fresh oil seems to be coming from this area. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see this on camera. I'd imagine it's quite challenging for my cameraman. But if we trace it back, by the looks of it, it's coming from the input shaft, from the whole clutch drive shaft stuff. So by the looks of it, at some point, we're going to have to learn how to split one of these in half, because like a full-size tractor, that's kind of what you have to do to work on that oil seal. So this whole frame will have to be unbolted from the gearbox here, take the lot out, somehow take that shaft out. I'm not sure how that comes out. Another thing for us to research in future. And then replace the oil seal there, and I'd imagine we'll probably do any other ones that need doing or might need doing at the same time, so that's all finished. Yeah, we'll have to have a think about where that lies in our priorities now that we know which oil seal it is. Now, clearly these are the original rear tyres, since they are the Dunlop 6-12 tractor implement tyres, which were originally fitted to these Boland's Ride-a-matics, everything like that. And while they've got quite a bit of cracking and a few chunks out of the tread, they are still decent depth of tread on there. So we're going to keep using them. We're not going to buy new tyres just yet. Now this one doesn't hold air, the other one does, but we're going to tube both of them just so that they both hold air, and it makes it a bit more usable and push friendly when we're pushing this around into various sheds, stuff like that. The only challenge with this might be breaking the bead on something that hasn't moved in over 60 years, but hopefully if the rim's in good condition, not too rusted on there, that shouldn't be a problem. So that's an upcoming job, is putting tubes in these rear tyres. The front tyres are also probably the originals, which I forget, these Goodyears, I think, yeah, Goodyears, and they're cracked as well, but they're still usable, as you can see on there, and these both hold air, so that's handy. Don't need to do anything to those at the moment. So that's the wheels kind of gone over. Now the thing that's still confusing us a bit is this rear hitch, which, as we've said before, majorly over-engineered it would seem, and there seems to be quite a bit of movement in this, which it seems there might be some ovalled holes here, which we either need to drill out and bush or weld up and re-drill, both in this bracket here. That bracket appears to be slightly loose on the gearbox as well, so we need to investigate that. That hole there as well, maybe the holes at the bottom for that too, before we start trying to use this at some point. Also, this is slightly bent on this part, so we need to put that in the press and try and squash that part down. Rises up about there and then goes down again. So clearly there's been a pretty heavy implement in the back there previously. Speaking of which, we're still looking for some auto-colto attachments to go into the back of this. So if you're in the UK and you have some auto-colto attachments with like a square mounting block that would go in there with a pinhole through it, that may be compatible to our Cub Cadet, so please do let us know if you're interested in selling it, because we're definitely interested in getting some attachments for this hitch, because it is a pretty unique feature of this Cub. So we've made a note of all of the things that we've talked about in this video, and so we've made two lists effectively: jobs to do and parts to buy for this tractor, and that's all in our notes about this tractor, which we do with all of our machines when we start looking into them, kind of make files online about them and make to-do lists and everything, so that all of our information is in one place and it's somewhat organised, which helps us out a little bit. But besides a couple of things, this seems like a relatively straightforward project. Now I'm going to say that, and then we'll probably come across something a lot more difficult when we get into this, because that's always the case. But on the surface, from what we've seen, this cub doesn't look too bad of a project. Now, as we would have said in the introduction video about this tractor, we weren't expecting to buy this. It wasn't kind of in our plan. We didn't know it was going to become available. So we hadn't really factored it into our schedule of next projects. However, since this is looking like a relatively small project, or dare I say easier project compared to some of our other tractors, we might run it alongside a bigger project, seeing as we're always having gaps waiting for parts on those other projects, and therefore we can fit in some other jobs, such as maybe this tractor. So that's how we think we're going to work this probably. We've left some tissue under the back end there just so that we can confirm our suspicions about where the oil is dripping from, rather than putting it back on the floor and then moving it about. But that's it for this video. Let us know what you think of our Cub Cadet now that we've gone through some of the issues. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.